Hello, everybody, and welcome to Authors Chat with Beth Jordan. And I'm really happy today to be introducing one of our new indie authors, coming from a group of other authors that we all got to know each other from Write That Book Masterclass, which was in fact led by a very, very well-known author called Michael Heppel. And so I met my latest author friend from that period of time. Her name is Debbie Bias. Hello, Debbie.
Hello.
Hello. How are you today, Debbie?
It's a beautiful sunny day in Florida, so I'm just fine. Thank you.
Oh, that's such good news because it happens to be a beautiful sunny day up in Scotland where I live. It's been really warm all day, and I thought, oh my God, summer is here. But I was told tomorrow is going to be cloudy, so summer will go. Anyway, that's the way of life in Scotland. Anyway, so once again, welcome. And this is, I think, approximately the 14th episode of Authors Chat. And this is a different story that I will be introducing today, a different story genre that Debbie has written. And so I'm going to start off by asking Debbie a question. And it's a question, I'm going to give her time to reflect on it as well. So Debbie, now that you have written your book, which is called, do you want to tell us the title of your story?
The title is Love, Betrayal, Rebound, A Survivor's Guide.
Okay, A Survivor's Guide. So I think this will be very important for a lot of our listeners and our readers to buy eventually after we've had this conversation. And you're going to tell us where the book is available as well at the end, Debbie.
Yes.
So tell us about this story of yours, Love, Betrayal, Rebound, A Survivor's Guide. What has it done for you, and how has it changed your life?
Well, after a third divorce, I had to do a deep dive into my life because I'm a Christian and I don't believe in divorce. So it's like, how on earth did I end up divorced 3 times?
Yeah.
So I just started at the very beginning of my life. And as I was writing the story and also doing research on narcissism, I realized that my mother was a narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
Now, narcissists are on a scale, kind of like autism, it's a spectrum. And my mother wasn't necessarily high on the spectrum like my 2 narcissist husbands were, but she was on there. And so I grew up always thinking that I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't pretty enough, I wasn't talented enough, and basically I just wasn't enough, and I was only ever going to be a nobody. So as I realized that and dug more into narcissism, it helped me to understand why I've made so many mistakes in my life and realize what I would have done differently. So at the end of every chapter, I have a list of lessons I learned and lessons I wish I had learned.
Right, yes.
So,
Yeah. I have, in fact, read Debbie's book, and I do like at the end of the chapter a summary of her thoughts and how the passage of her life has taken her and where it's taken her and what she has learned from it and what she wishes, as she said, she has learned about it maybe earlier, so that those mistakes may not be. But Debbie, do you think that there really are mistakes, the things that have happened? Do you think the things that happen in your life were mistakes or just the way life goes in general?
Well, some of them were mistakes I knew I was making because I've been a Christian since I was, I don't know, 13 or 14 years old. And I knew what the things that I was doing in college were wrong, my party days. And when I first dated my first husband, I was rebounding from a really serious relationship that I thought would have ended in marriage. And I dated Mike, even though I knew, or Mark in the book, even though I knew that he was only separated for a month and he was still married. So, that's not what I believe, that you should ever date a married man.
Yeah.
Let alone get engaged and marry him after his divorce. So it was a mistake that I knew I was making, but I fooled myself into thinking it was okay.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned narcissism, and I was going to ask you that question a little bit later on in our conversation. So this word narcissism, it actually goes right through your whole life story. Although you look very young woman. Um, we won't
Young
go
woman
there.
at
Young
70.
woman, young woman, you look very young woman. So this word narcissism has had a massive impact in the whole of your life
Mhm.
from various people around you. So tell me a little bit more about this narcissism. I know about the old Greek fable. I think it was Greek fable of narcissism, the narcissist who looked into the pond water and fell in love with himself. But from your real life experience of narcissism, just tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I I am an introvert by nature.
Mm,
It's difficult for me to be outgoing unless I know somebody really well.
mhm,
So my sister never met a stranger. So it helped me when I was growing up that I had Joni to ask people questions for me and do that.
mm,
My mother was very outgoing, and my first husband, who is a covert narcissist,
mm,
was extremely outgoing. Everybody loved him. It worked for him for work because what he told me one time is, "I'm a chameleon. I can be whatever the client
yeah,
wants me to
yeah.
be." He went to church. He led an adult Sunday school class. He was in the church choir. He appeared to the outside world to be Mr. Wonderful.
Mhm,
So everybody thought he was just great. Except at home, he was verbally and emotionally abusive to me. Um, he neglected my daughter, and he was physically abusive with my son, whom he
mm,
later disowned.
mm,
So I, he only cared about how he appeared.
mhm,
And being the codependent that I am, I covered for him. I can remember going to church choir and practice, and people would ask me, "Where's Mike tonight?"
mm,
"Oh, gee, I don't know. He must have had an important meeting," when I knew he was probably out with another woman,
mm,
because he
mm,
told me 10 years after we were married that he didn't marry me because he loved me, but he needed a wife for his new promotion
mhm,
to in a very conservative company, and I was educated and attractive enough to help him move up the corporate ladder.
mm,
Not recently, when I confronted him with that because he questioned me about why I would write a book, I
mm,
said, "Well, Mike, some of the things that you said to me really traumatized me, especially that you told me that 10 years into our marriage that you didn't marry me because you loved me."
mm.
And I said, "You did say that, didn't you?" He said, "Yeah, I said that, but you didn't really help me move up the corporate ladder." And I said, "Well, I never claimed that I did, but you did say those words to me."
Yeah, yeah.
So, and then when I told him I was going to publish the book after the discussion with him, he said, "So what am I, just collateral damage?" And I'm thinking, "You destroyed our whole family, and you're worried about a book I'm writing that nobody in your hometown will ever read,
Yeah,
and nobody knows me by this name anyway."
yeah, yeah.
So it's all about him,
Hmm.
all about him.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
And
with my third husband, he's a malignant narcissist.
okay, I've not
And
heard that expression before.
yeah, well, I some of the books, in fact, I think at the very back of my book, I listed some resources that I used to help
Hmm.
me in my research.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I read it for the first time.
Okay.
But this one was out to get everything for himself. He didn't care who he ran over to get it. And
Hmm.
he actually showed his dark side to some of my friends.
Hmm.
So some people recognize the narcissism.
Right. Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
I gave him a list of 18 things that I would have to have if I would ever get married a third time. And the first one that he had to love God more than anybody else.
Hmm.
And after knowing him for 5 or 6 years, I would say the only way that's true is if he's God.
Okay.
Which
So,
he obviously isn't. So
so that wasn't going to work, was it?
no, that wasn't gonna
No.
work.
So how has writing this book actually changed your life or your attitude to life or your outlook on life?
Well, I think it's strengthened my faith and helped me understand how there are always consequences for bad choices,
Hmm.
and the consequences from being a rebellious young young person in my late teens and early 20s
Mm.
have really impacted the rest of my life
Right.
because I didn't think very much of me after
Yeah.
those years.
Yeah. And how are you feeling now that you've, to some extent, unburdened yourself through your writing?
I have more confidence. I am able to better recognize traits in others that I know are dangerous to me,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
so I back off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I'm able to help some of my friends when they come and discuss an issue they're having with someone else.
Mm.
I can give them reflective questions and help them see how maybe it's a toxic relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I've just become a lot more reflective, I think.
Mm. Yeah. And your family around you, those who really care about you and your friends and family, what is the biggest change would you say that they see in you after having written this book?
Well, my son is thrilled that I wrote the book. He loves it.
Mm.
He's about to go get his 17-year-old daughter next week to spend a week with him. And he says one of the things he's going to make her do is read that book. As
Okay.
long as she reads the first couple of chapters, I'm happy. She
Yeah.
doesn't have to read the rest of it.
Yeah.
But if she could read the first couple of chapters, I would be happy. But because I really was thinking of writing it for my granddaughters so they
Mm.
could read it before leaving home
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
going out into the world so that they can possibly avoid some of the mistakes I made when
Mm.
I wasn't under my mother's thumb.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned your strong Christian faith. And throughout your whole story, your Christian faith has been, I'd say, your guiding light.
Yes.
Yeah. And what was it about your faith that gave you the strength in your darkest hours or when you were feeling entirely on your own?
Well, I believe that when you become a Christian, you're given the Holy Spirit to live inside of you.
Mm.
And it's more than just your conscience, but it is a guide. And when I'm doing something wrong, the Holy Spirit speaks to me. Sometimes I don't listen because I'm pretty
Yeah.
strong-willed and rebellious
Yeah.
myself. But when I'm still and listen to what God's will is for my life,
Mm.
and when there are times in my life when I've just been devastated over things, and I go to the Bible, I go to the book of Psalms, and
Mm.
Psalms just comforts me. So,
Yeah. Is there one psalm in particular that stands out that you can remember that really helped
oh
you?
gosh, there's so many that are good.
Just one.
We all know the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not
Yeah.
want.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's the
Yeah.
first one that comes to mind, but there are so many. They're just, they just,
Yeah.
I would just read the whole book of Psalms and just get comfort from that.
Mm. I
And the life
remember.
of David. David made some serious mistakes. He
Yeah.
was unfaithful. He had someone murdered. He did some terrible things in his life, but the Bible says that he was a man after God's own heart.
Hmm.
So God loved him anyway.
Yeah.
That gives me peace.
Yeah. I remember singing that song because I went to Roman Catholic school, to a convent, in fact. I remember singing that song. It's interesting about how Christian faith can be your guiding light. I remember my own mum. Um, she was what we call a staunch Catholic,
Mhm.
and you couldn't detract her from her pathway of her belief in God. We used to have lots of arguments because although I was baptized a Catholic, I didn't follow the Catholic faith in the strictness that my mother did. Although I'm spiritual, but not necessarily following the religion to the nth note. But what I recognize with my mom and her faith, because I would often think, how does she have the strength to live her life when she's had so many upsets, so much heartache in her life? And I wanted to ask her, and I said, how do you keep going? Even when she was like 80 years old, she still had this incredible faith in God, and she really loved God. And she said, I just really believe in God. I believe in my religion. I believe in the Catholic upbringing that I've had. And and it's there by my side all the time. And it is remarkable. And I thought, I wish in a way I could have some of that strong belief. Now, a lot of people who may listen to this may say, oh, that's a lot of rubbish, believing in God. But I don't think that really matters, does it, Debbie? Because if you believe in God, that's what really matters. If you believe in your
Exactly.
spirituality and your Christianity, and if it really supports you and helps you, it doesn't matter if somebody else mocks you or makes fun of you at all.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah, I used that. My mother raised me to be worried about what people thought about me. And I learned over the years that it doesn't matter what people think of me. It matters what God thinks of me.
okay, okay. And have there been moments, and this is, I'm going slightly off kilter, but have there been moments when you have really felt that strong presence?
Oh, yes.
What's the point where there's a hand on your shoulder or a breath on your face? Have you ever felt that?
Oh, absolutely. I can remember vividly the the night after my son found his dad's pornography on the computer.
Mm,
He hung posters up all over the house that said busted. And I walked in I was on the board of a ministry, and Mike had promised to be home with the kids that night.
mm,
And the next day, Michael took his Prozac that he'd been put on for depression.
mm,
He took his ADHD medication, and someone at his school in the lunchroom had an apple juice bottle it was full of vodka with just enough apple juice to cover it or to
mm,
color it. And he swallowed it and ended up in respiratory distress in a puddle of mud face down in a local park.
mm,
So when I got to the hospital, because the police found him, called me, um, I raced to the hospital. And when I was waiting to see him, because they had to clean him up, he'd also fallen in some concrete, some wet concrete,
mm,
where they were building the foundation of a house
mm.
across the street from the park. He'd lost a shoe in the concrete. He was just a mess. But while I was waiting, it was as if God wrapped his arms around me and said, Debbie, I didn't mean for you to live this way. This is
Yeah,
not what I had in mind for you.
yeah,
And so, I mean, I felt totally released from staying married to this man who had been unfaithful to me for 22 years.
yeah, yeah.
But since the child psychiatrist told me that it would be the worst time for me to get a divorce,
Mm.
I ended up staying with him another 2 years. But it was not easy. It was,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah. And then I'll never forget, I was part of Bible Study Fellowship International
Hmm.
for 8 years. And I had been working for a Methodist evangelist for 3.5 years.
Mm.
And in Bible study, we had a small group first. And in a small group, it's as if I heard God whispering in my ear, Debbie, you need to quit your job and take care of your family. And I said, but God, I help pay for private school with what I earn working here. And on the way to the large group lecture, I heard it again. Sitting in the lecture, I heard it a third time. And on the way out, I was with my friend Connie, and I said to Connie, you're not going to believe this, but I've heard 3 times this morning from God that I'm supposed to quit my job and take care of my family. I don't understand that. But and Connie looked at me and she said, Debbie, if God told you 3 times, you have to be obedient. And I
Mm.
said, yeah, I know. So I went home, I hand wrote a note because this was back when we didn't have scanners and all that kind of
Mm.
stuff. So I hand
Mm.
wrote a note, sent a fax to my boss that said, I have to resign. Don't call me today. I'm much too upset. We'll
Yeah.
talk about it later, but I have to give you my 2 weeks notice.
Mm.
And 2 days later, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from my sister that said, Debbie, mom's in the emergency room. You need to get from Atlanta to Orlando as fast as you can.
Mm.
So I spent the next 2 days turning all of my files over to someone else in the ministry. And my mother died 3 months later from pancreatic cancer.
Mm.
So the family I was supposed to take care of was my mother.
Yeah, yeah. Strong and powerful messages, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you. And Love, Betrayal, and Rebound, a survivor's guide, delves into, we've talked about the concept of narcissism, about betrayal, and the struggle to rebuild your life after a difficult marriage and personal anguish. What message or insights do you hope readers will take away from your story? I mean, especially in terms of overcoming adversity and finding that inner strength?
Yeah, the takeaway for me is just to always trust God. When Mike divorced me, because I did, even though, we had been in um, it had been a rocky marriage for a long time, ever since I found out about the affairs, actually.
Mm,
But Mike told me he would take care of me for the rest of my life. I would never have to work again. So here I am, almost 50 years old, having to go out and support myself because the
mm,
state of Georgia gives 7 years of alimony, and it started out high, but it went down. So, and my attorney said, Debbie, you're gonna have to go dust off your teaching degree and go get a teaching job. And I said, no,
mm,
I've been out of the public schools for 23 years. I'll have to go get another degree to be able to do that. So I just, like always, I do what I have to do to make it work. So I did get another teaching job, and
mm,
I did teach for 15 years
mhm,
before I retired from that position. And then when my last marriage fell apart, it was financially devastating for me because it appears that he married me with the intention of getting as much of my money as he could
mm,
because he hadn't planned for retirement. He told me we had equal assets before we got married, and I didn't ask for proof. And then when, you know, we got married, he ran up my credit card, so I had to refinance my house to pay off the debt because I found out in the first year we were married that almost everything he told me was a lie.
mm,
All he had was $1,800 a month income from Social Security. He didn't
yeah,
have the house he told me he owned me in Tennessee. He didn't have a retirement plan. I was his retirement plan.
right.
Um, he, he didn't have life insurance. He didn't have anything
Mm,
except that $1,800 a month. And it's impossible to live in the United States on
yeah,
$1,800 a month.
yeah,
So
yeah,
since I had all of those things, in fact, when I married him, I owned two homes. I had my home and a rental home. I had two cars paid off, and his car blew up 5 months after we were married. So it's just like one
mm,
thing after another. But I would say over 5 or 6 years, he probably cost me about $200,000 in assets.
mm,
So that means I have to work a little longer before I can retire again.
yeah. But
So,
it seems to me though that maybe it's a direct was the result of your Christian faith, but you
mhm.
seem to me to be a really strong person that despite adversities that come your way, that despite traumas and difficulties and sadness, you seem to really be able to pick yourself up and to continue. Yeah.
By the grace of God.
By the grace of God.
Only
Yeah.
by the grace of God. I'd be in a straitjacket somewhere without my faith.
And in your bio, because you have mentioned it a few times already, but in your bio you mentioned that you do not believe in divorce. Yet we hear that you have been married, you've been divorced 3 times. So tell us a little bit about this. What I mean,
Well, like I mentioned, yeah, I
yeah.
mentioned earlier that I was rebounding from a 3-year, very serious relationship when I met my first husband.
Mm,
And he was 5 years older than I was. He already owned his own home. He had a good job. He was funny. He could sing. He would bring his guitar over and serenade me in my
mm,
apartment. And he just seemed to be the whole package. And
yeah,
I fell head over heels in love with him, but I didn't give myself time to heal from the previous relationship.
yeah.
The second marriage was a rebound from my first divorce.
Mm,
He was a neighbor. I dated him off and on for I think 7 years after the divorce before I
mm,
married him. But he was a rebound relationship. And then I had been dating someone that I thought was finally the right person.
mm,
And I think we dated for 6 or 7 months, and then all of a sudden he ghosted me. And it's like, what? So I was reeling from that when Bruce came back into my life. I'd known
mm,
him since I was 14 years old from high school.
yeah.
And he convinced two of my girlfriends that he was the greatest thing in the world, that he was my knight in shining armor, even though I told him I didn't need to be rescued. I didn't. I was doing just fine on my own. I was just heartbroken at the time.
Yeah.
But he moved right in, pushed really hard, and convinced me to get married. I think we saw each other in August, and we were married January 3rd. It was too fast. And I
Yeah.
told him it was too fast. I said, we need to date for at least a year before we discuss anything serious. He said, Debbie, you've known me since you were 14. How long do you have to know me? And it's like, I didn't have a good answer to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I kind of got bulldozed into that one.
Okay.
And the sad thing is I didn't really, I cared about him. And I had a friendship love for him, but I wasn't madly in love with him. But I knew he was 2.5 years older than I was. He was not in good health and he was going to need someone to take care of him. And I thought, I care enough about him to do that for him.
Okay. That's remarkable, really, it is. Yeah. So I like just to remind the readers, listeners and readers, that at the end of each chapter, you have the things that you wish, the things that you've done, and
Things
things
that I
that you
wish I had learned. Yeah.
things you wish you had learned. So I think that's going to be very important for when the readers read that, and also for them to check in with themselves and compare with their own lives and things that they wish they had done as well or known, and they would do it differently. Yeah.
Yes, in
So
fact, another one of our fellow writers, Fiona
yeah.
Miles, had suggested, or she's writing a companion journal to go with one of her books. I said to her, I said, I think that's what I need to do for my book, so that people can examine their own lives.
Yeah.
So while I have already started a second book called Taco Tuesday about raising 2 ADHD kids with an ADHD father, I think I'm going to put that on hold and focus on writing that companion journal next.
Okay. Okay. And have you started that
No,
No?
just in my mind.
Okay. Okay. So can we expect a second book from you, say, by the spring of next year, 2025?
Yes, that would be, yeah, I should be able to get it done by spring of next year.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. And in fact, there's a lot in Debbie's book, more than we've had time to discuss. We've discussed a little bit about the loves that she's had, the betrayals, the rebounds, and her very strong Christian faith that really keeps her, it's her rock. It really keeps, it's her rock and her foundation. It really keeps her together, despite anything else that's ever done for her. There's always that central point in her life that holds her, it's her faith. So it's something, I think, for me to start thinking about the faith that I have as well. So I think in listening to you and talking with you and you sharing your story, it's made me think about how strong is my faith, and does my faith help me in any way? It's time for me to reflect upon that. Yeah. So what's now? So you're going to write a companion, and you said you're going to put on hold another book about ADHD. I think we talked a little bit about that before. Just tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, my my children were really funny. They've both got really good senses of humor. And there were some crazy things that happened growing up with, and raising them. And unfortunately, my daughter has blocked out a lot of her childhood. Because I asked her one day, I said, so Kelly, you've always had a great sense of humor. Tell me some funny things that you remember. And she said, I don't remember a lot from childhood, Mom. I said, really? I said, what do you remember? She said, I remember I liked cooking with you. And she said, I liked playing in the woods behind our house. I liked riding my bicycle. And that's all she could remember. And that makes me really sad because there were some really funny things. That one of the things that comes to my mind is when Mike didn't come home one night, I'd made ribeye steaks on the grill. I think I'd made lemon broccoli and what else did I have with that? I think it was twice baked potatoes or something. And when he didn't come home, I frequently would just cover up his dinner and leave it on the table until whatever time he did get home, often after the rest of us were in bed. But he came home about, I think, 8 p.m. one night and came upstairs kind of grumpy. And he said, well, that was an interesting dinner. I said, what? You didn't like your steak? Was it not cooked right? was it too cold? You could have warmed it up in the microwave. And he said, what steak? And I said, there was a ribeye steak on your plate with the broccoli and the potato. He said, not on my plate, just broccoli and potato. I
Okay.
went, okay, what happened to the steak? Kelly had this little dog that we adopted from the shelter named Sweetie. I went downstairs and looked at the plate. The bone for the steak was underneath the table.
Okay.
I jumped up on the table and eaten the steak.
Yeah.
So, things like that always made me laugh,
Yeah.
especially in retrospect. Mike's temper, he wasn't real happy with that. But, there were a lot of other things that happened just because my kids were so impulsive.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe there's a story around the children.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can maybe talk about that when that book is published.
Yeah, I want it to be lighter. I want
Yeah.
it to be more humorous
Yes. Yeah.
than my first book. Because
Yeah.
even though there is some humor in there,
Mm.
I think it's much more serious than I wanted it to be.
That's fine. It's okay. So just to remind us, where can the readers and the listeners readers buy your book from?
Okay, well, my publisher is lulu.com, and they have a bookstore. It should be available there. And I have to find out, the last time I checked on Amazon, they didn't have the paperback on there. So I need to
Okay.
check with Lulu and find out why the paperback. The only one that's available on Amazon right now is the hardback.
All
And
right.
they're
Okay.
asking $50 for the hardback.
Right.
Now,
Yeah.
the hardback has a size 12 font, which is larger than the paperback.
Right. Okay.
And the photographs are all in color
Uh-huh.
in the
Right.
hardback, where the paperback has black and white photos in a smaller font.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely worth your while to check about the paperback, because I'm sure it'll be a lot cheaper as well. And so it's
That was
available on.
$20.
So is this on Amazon USA, or is it worldwide Amazon, or how does it work for you?
I opened it for global publication.
Okay, right. Okay.
So it should be available
In
for
England,
everybody.
in the
And
UK.
on your advice, I'm going to try and do the KDP and get it available so people can read it on their iPads and phones.
Yes. I think an ebook would be very, very useful. Definitely. Yeah. So we must bring this lovely conversation to a close. Thank you, Debbie, for chatting with us, telling us about your book, Love, Betrayal, Rebound, A Survivor's Guide. And I really would urge listeners and readers to get a copy. There is so much in this, and Debbie tells the story really well. And there are wonderful photos of Debbie as a little girl growing up. Wonderful, wonderful photos, and of her family. So it's a very personal story. So, and I think it's a wonderful way to get to know Debbie, her heart, her mind, her spirituality, and the story that she tells. And the reader and listener takeaway, I hope, will be very valuable and very touching. Thank you so much, Debbie, for joining me today.
Thank you,
and
Beth.
Talk to you very soon when the next book comes out. Thank you.
Awesome.
And
Okay,
bye for now.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Just remind us, where do you live in America?
Pardon me?
Where do you live
Where
in
do I live?
America? Yes.
I live in Florida, in the
Florida.
Sunshine State.
Yes, in the Sunshine State. Yep. Yeah. I think maybe we should all go and live in Florida, the Sunshine State, this year, particularly in Scotland, is horrible.
Well, my ancestry says that I think I'm 30-some% Scottish.
Okay.
A trip to Scotland may be in my future.
Maybe, and if I'm still here, I will be happy to see you in Scotland.
Awesome.
Thank you, Debbie. Bye for now, and goodbye, everybody. Bye. Thank you for joining us once again. Bye for now. Bye.